Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Wole Soyinka's 1964 play, The Strong Breed. This is an interesting play because while it revolves around ritual and the importance of ritual in these Yoruba communities in what's now Nigeria, the play is surprisingly bereft of the kind of ritualized performance we would often expect to see in West African drama. There's no song, there's no dance, there's no, there's some things that approximate proverbs, but there's not the kinds of performance of ritualized behavior that we very often see in West African drama. And so in that sense, it's an interesting choice that Soyinka has made with the approach that he takes here. So the play follows Eman, who is a stranger in the village that he's living in. He's a stranger, he's a transplant, basically. He's called a stranger in that way that, like, in the movie Jaws, right? You can live on the island your entire life, but if you weren't born there, you're still an outsider. This kind of thing. He's been here for a while. He seems to have integrated into the community, but he's still very clearly an outsider. And so we start kind of with this sense of foreboding because Sunma, it's not really clear what their relationship is. It seems like possibly a romantic relationship, but some of the things Eman says suggests it's not. Some of the things Sunma says suggests it is, or maybe that she wants it to be. But clearly Sunma has some sort of loyalty to Eman. She is trying to get him to leave this town, at least for a couple of days, surrounding the New Year festival. Eman doesn't want to go. There's no real reason given why he doesn't want to go. He just doesn't want to, and so he refuses, despite the fact that Sunma is, like, really clearly invested in them getting out of this town for a few days. We also have these elements of foreboding because we have this girl. I'm sort of, so she's supposed to be largely impassive. So I'm sort of picturing her as this very like uncanny type figure. Like she's this sort of figure who represents fear. There is something about her that is unsettling, even if we can't sort of pinpoint exactly what it is. We find out that she has some sort of disease and she has a carrier. So she's got a repository, in this case, an effigy of a person that as the new year turns over, the carrier is supposed to take her disease and she's supposed to become healthy. This sets an important pattern because this is actually kind of the core ritual of the strong breed. Eman refuses to leave. We see this, he's called an idiot boy, but I'm not really a fan of that term. We see this kid who has been hanging around Eman and Sunma's house. Sunma wants to drive him away. Eman doesn't want to. The kid's name is Ifada. We see a bunch of other villagers put a sack over Ifada's head and then basically carry him off, sort of black bag style. But then he escapes. Ifada runs to Eman and Sunma's house. Sunma says, don't let him in. Just leave, lock the door and leave it. Eman refuses to do this. He lets Ifada in. The villagers come and they're like, he's the carrier. He is the one who's going to to adopt the sins of the village so that we can go into the new year without these sort of toxic elements. So this is a scapegoating thing. This is a sacrificial ritual in which, in this case, a stranger to the village becomes the repository of the village's sins, and then Eman thinks that that stranger is exiled. We actually come to learn later on that that stranger is executed. So the village wants to use Ifada because he's developmentally disabled, intellectually disabled, has learning disability, whatever it is. He's not viewed as a particularly productive member of society. And so in that sense, they can symbolically load him with all of their problems, issues, whatever it is, and they don't feel like they are losing a proper member of the community. Eman critiques this. The villagers come and they sort of explain what's going on. Oroge, who is one of the village elders or village leaders, who really kind of doesn't want to get Eman more involved than he has to, basically is like, listen, man, like, officially we have to burn down your house because the carrier's been in it and now your house is contaminated, but you're a stranger, so we won't tell anybody. No harm, no foul. Eman is like, but that doesn't even make any sense. And Eman's critique, basically, of this system is that it's a weak village that can't produce its own carrier and that needs to load strangers with its problems. This is kind of a weird critique until we learn just a little bit later that in his own village, which he has fled from, Eman's family were the carriers. So Eman's family is the strong breed that carries the sins of the village in a symbolic repository, in this case a boat, down to the river and then releases them. So they purge the community of its sins in this symbolic act. Whereas the village that Eman is now in, they purge the community of its sins through symbolically sacrificing, and not symbolically sacrificing, they symbolically purge the community of its sins by actually sacrificing a stranger who is loaded with the sins of the community. And so this is really interesting because there's actually a guy, a drama theorist named René Girard, who has this idea that the core element of tragedy, of tragic drama, is the scapegoating technique. It is identifying a particular person who has at least a quasi-outsider status, making them responsible for all of the violence and problems that exist within the community, and then exiling or killing them in order to purge the negative experiences. And what Girard says is that the reason that this works is not necessarily because that person is actually responsible for the negative situations, but because the community invests all of their conflict into this person and then removes them, the community experiences the purging of those violences, the purging of that conflict. And so it takes place phenomenologically, basically. Like, because people believe that it has happened, the effect is as though it has happened. So if you have, say, a quarrel with your neighbor, but then that's symbolically purged, and you feel that it has been purged, then you let that quarrel go. The fact that whatever the source of the quarrel was likely still remains, is irrelevant to your experience of it. And so this is kind of the interesting thing here, is that these two different villages, the village that Eman is from and the village that he's currently living in, have adopted dramatically different approaches to this, this idea of purging the guilt of the community. In Eman's village, this is very much symbolic, but it's also regarded as an extremely heavy duty. And so an old man, because we get these flashbacks where as Eman is fleeing from, so Eman takes Ifada's place as the carrier, not realizing necessarily that it involves death. Like he has this model in his mind from his home village in which it is a symbolic action. But then once he finds out that this actually involves being killed, he tries to flee, and the latter half of the play is basically taken up with Eman trying to escape, the villagers pursuing him, and Eman's backstory being developed through flashbacks. We meet an old man who is Eman's father, and what he says is, so Eman says, "I will never come back." Because he's left the village. There's a whole thing I'm not going to talk about with Eman's love, woman who dies in childbirth. Not important for my purposes, though it is actually important to the play. So Eman says, "I will never come back." And the old man says, "Do you know what you were saying? Ours is a strong breed, my son. It is only a strong breed that can take this boat to the river year after year and wax stronger on it. I have taken down each year's evils for over 20 years. I hoped you would follow me." Eman doesn't want to do this. He asserts that he can go out into the world and he can do other stuff that's just as important, just as good, etc., etc. And his father says, "I tell you it is true. Your own blood will betray you, son, because you cannot hold it back. If you make it do less than this, it will rush to your head and burst it open. I say what I know, my son." So this is a really important component, because what we have here is the idea of fate being introduced. Fate in the form of blood, in the form of Eman is the strong breed. He is the carrier of the sacrifice. And so he will make that sacrifice regardless of whether he does it in his own village through the form of the boat, or whether he does it in this other village in the form of being sacrificed. And the old man, Eman's father, directly says, "I'm very sad. You only go to give to others what rightly belongs to us. You will use your strength among thieves. They are thieves because they take what is ours. They have no claim of blood to it. They will even lack the knowledge to use it wisely." So Eman's father even says to him, "You will play this part. You will be a carrier, but other people, other villages do things wrong. They don't appreciate how being a carrier should work and what our blood lets us do as carriers." And that is, in fact, what happens. Eman goes to this new village where he hopes to escape his destiny as a carrier, and he ends up becoming a carrier in this new village, and it destroys him. This is tragedy. This is classic Aristotelian tragedy. The attempt to avoid fate, hamartia, the tragic mistake, peripeteia, the reversal, etc., etc. All the parts of classic Aristotelian tragedy are in The Strong Breed. And of course, Soyinka is massively influenced by Western drama, including by ancient Greek drama. And so that's not really that surprising. But the other thing that we have, a couple of other things that are really interesting. We have a Christian overtone here, because Eman is sacrificed for the community, And in fact, the way that they catch him ultimately is with a kind of trap, an elephant trap. Jaguna, who's the other elder who's going around with Oroge, says, when Jaguna sets the trap, even elephants pay homage, their trunks downward and one leg up in the sky. When the carrier steps on the fallen twigs, it is up in the sacred tree with him. This is interesting. The idea that the carrier, the one who is to be sacrificed, shall be raised into a tree. In the medieval period, for instance, there's a long tradition that has, I think, kind of died out in the modern period of referring to the cross on which Jesus was crucified as a tree. The idea that a sacrifice is to be raised into a tree where it will meet its death, there is a Christian allusion there. So we get that element of it. But then the other thing that's really interesting, in Girard's explanation of how scapegoating works in tragedy, the idea is that the community is purged. And theoretically, that's like Aristotle's idea as well. This idea of catharsis is theoretically a purging of pity and fear. There's debate about whether that means a purging of that amongst the characters or a purging of that amongst the audience. Doesn't matter for our purposes, because at the end of the play, it's very clear that what this carrier was meant to eliminate from this community, there is ambiguity about whether it has been successful. Has this sacrifice, has this ritual worked? Jaguna says, I'm sick to the heart of the cowardice I've seen tonight. Oroge says, that is the nature of men. Jaguna says, then it is a sorry world to live in. We did it for them. It was all for their own common good. What did it benefit me whether the man lived or died? But did you see them? One and all they looked up at the man and words died in their throat. Oroge says it was no common sight. Jaguna says women would not have behaved so shamefully. One by one they crept off like sick dogs. Not one could raise a curse. Oroge says, it was not only him they fled. Do you see how unattended we are? Jaguna says, there are those who will pay for this night's work. So it raises this question of, yes, they've killed the carrier, the sacrifice is completed, but did it actually purge the community's sins? Did it work to sacrifice this man?